Hello and welcome to our first learning unit, the language of art. We're going to be discussing three different types of analysis, and our first section is talking all about formal analysis, so how the art object actually looks, and we're excluding any sort of meaning or subject matter. The first kind of section for formal analysis is the elements of design. And after that, we're going to talk about the principles of design. So there are 7 elements: line, shape, form, space, color, texture, and time. So a foundation for any artwork, to begin the discussion, you can look at the line and start to describe the qualities of the line. So the line is the very basic foundation. It starts as a point, and then you create a mark between two different points with a form of medium. A medium is the material used for the artwork. So it can be a pen, a pencil, paint, anything that's going to create a mark. We can also describe line as the edge created when two shapes meet. So that is very significant when we're discussing the style of a painting. So based on how crisp the edges are for where the shapes meet, we can call it painterly or very geometric, and we'll look at some more examples of that soon. So line is also important because it implies direction. So sometimes we have implied lines that may not be visible, however, through a gesture or through patterns and shape, the eye is moved towards a certain direction. So here are some of the different qualities and the different vocabulary we can use to describe line. The contour lines are used to denote mass. So oftentimes if we're looking at figural work, for instance here, we're denoting the volume of the body and the mass of the different body parts with these curved lines. And looking over here, we see a painting by Van Gogh, and we immediately recognize that it's Van Gogh's work, so therefore that is an autographic line. And here we have some implied lines, a Da Vinci piece where we're looking up towards the heaven to see God based on these figures and the movement of their bodies to imply that line. So here we have two different styles that we can denote by looking at how the line looks when we have the shapes of the bodies. So looking at this Eugene Delacroix piece, there's very visible brush strokes. The shapes aren't as crisp, and so this we know by virtue of the line that it's a romantic style. And we can contrast that with a more neoclassical style by looking at a line that is much more geometric and crisp. So here's a contemporary artist, Hung Lu. She was originally trained as a painter in communist China under Mao, and she relocated to New York and then ended up here in Oakland in the Bay Area, and she continues to paint. And her techniques are a mixture of her communist training and also her free expressive American style, and we see that with her brush strokes. So once we finish this presentation, come back to the slide and view this YouTube video to see her process, and then you can understand a little bit more about line and the different types of line and how they are achieved. Okay, so we're moving on to our next element, shape. Shape becomes a self-contained two-dimensional area indicated by an outline, and it is flat. So we haven't added our volume yet. And a form is simply a three-dimensional shape. So that's when we add the depth to the shape, it becomes a form. And here are some more terms. We have the subject, the lemons, taking up a positive shape, and the background, the shape created by that, is a negative shape. And to look at that more closely, this is important because this concept will lead us into talking about figure-ground reversal. So the base layer of a background of a painting is the ground, and the ground is known as the negative shape, while the figure over the ground is the positive shape. So usually the figure is the subject matter. But as we can see here with the Rubin vase, this artist is playing with our perception, with the reversal of the figure-ground relationship, because based on how you look at it, it could be two faces are the figures with the negative shape being this black area, or the positive shape is the vase with the negative shape being the white areas. A contemporary artist who plays with the figure-ground reversal is Kara Walker, and here she has these superimposed prints on what looks like a scene from slavery in the South. And that's her subject matter talks a lot about race dynamics in America. And she is an artist based out of Oakland, I believe, but she shows her work throughout the US. Another artist who was interested in the figure-ground reversal was Henri Matisse, and we will be looking at his work later on in the semester. Some ways to describe shape, okay? Biomorphic has more natural curvature, so shapes we find in nature and the figure are seen as biomorphic and organic. These, and then in contrast to that, we have geometric, which is just purely line. It's a little more abstract. Another very important element that I want you to always be asking yourself about is space. So space is what contains form, and it is how the picture plane is set up. We have this kind of dilemma of representing three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface of a canvas. So various artists throughout time have grappled with this problem in different ways. And during the Renaissance is where we have a very strict linear perspective system that was created. And it definitely conveys a sense of pictorial depth, where all of the lines, which we call orthogonals, in the picture plane are receding to one vanishing point in the distance. And in this case, this is Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. All the lines are converging towards a space above Jesus' head. We can talk about space and perspective also when we look at architecture. Here's an example of Gothic architecture from Chartres Cathedral. It's very obvious. It's very, space is very magnified. Here's an installation by Kara Walker on the bottom corner, where she's playing with space and imposing these kind of flat two-dimensional objects on what seems to be three-dimensional projections. So linear perspective is a mathematically accurate system of drawing lines in such a way that the parallel lines recede to a single point or 2 points on the viewer's horizon. And this technique was developed extensively during the Renaissance by Brunelleschi and others, but it was Da Vinci and Michelangelo that really practiced it and brought it into the mainstream. So how do we describe space? Space can be described as being flat, having depth, having linear perspective. We use all these different elements to denote space. Light, color, value, and perspective are elements that can be used to define the illusion of space. So if you're talking about the space in a painting in one of your commentaries and assignments, I want you to add in the different elements and talk about how light affects the space and how the value and color and perspective also. So we can see here that in the horizon, the light gets a little bit more hazy and bluish, and that's giving us an atmosphere in our space. As we continue on into the modern era, moving away from the Renaissance, we start to see the conventions of denoting space change. Um, Most of the artists start to turn towards abstraction, um, and there's contextual reasons for that, which we'll go into later. So, in order to be abstract and we're moving away from the illusion of space, all of a sudden now we have a more flat perspective where things that are further away are just higher up in the picture plane, and we're not necessarily seeing things far away as more hazy, but everything is in crisp focus, whether or not it's really far away or really close to us. For instance, Hokusai's Great Wave, we see Mount Fiji in the distance, but he hasn't changed the color from this wave, for instance, that's close to us to show us that it's really far away. He's done something called hieratic scale, so he's showing something um, smaller as further away. So these are just different conventions of showing space. Our next element is color, which is obviously a pretty important element. Color is something that everyone can kind of relate to. Most people have a favorite color or colors that they notice. So we can all talk about color. Maybe it's even easier to talk about color than line. So be noticing that color has several attributes: hue, value, and saturation. So hue is actually just a synonym for color. So this is adding to your vocabulary. Hue and color mean the same thing. The value is the degree of lightness or darkness of the hue or color, and the value is created by the amount of light reflected from the object's surface. We can also talk about the intensity or the brightness of a color or a dullness of a color's quality, and that's called the saturation. So high saturation is really bright and vivid, whereas low saturation looks muddy and grayed. And here's an example of blue in a range of values. So you can see it's just the lightness and the darkness. The color wheel was kind of labeled by Sir Isaac Newton in 1660. And basically color is really related to science because we're looking at white light splitting in a prism into these 6 different tones. And then when we place them in a wheel with the primary and secondary colors across from one another, we can see that there's a relationship between the different hues. So primary colors, yellow, red, blue, secondary colors, green, orange, violet, and then the tertiary colors are in between the primary and secondary colors. A few different terms for describing color. Achromatic means no color. So when we're looking at a lot of ancient and classical antiquity sculptures, the color has flaked off, so they're colorless. Complementary colors, like I was mentioning, red and green, colors that are opposite from each other on the color wheel. Arbitrary color are colors that don't necessarily occur in nature. Local color is color that occurs true to nature, so more realist styles. Polychromatic means many colors, a huge array, not necessarily rooted in reality, but maybe something more from the imagination. So this is how color and value are used to give depth for spatial recession. Looking at Da Vinci's Madonna on the Rocks, we see atmospheric perspective with the rocks in the background here much more hazy and bluish gray. So there's a different kind of value here, and then it gets darker as the objects get closer to us. So there's a great range of value in any artwork that has a lot of drama. Chiaroscuro is one of our vocabulary words used to render the effects of light and dark during the Renaissance. Texture is another element, and it's usually implied unless we're looking at a sculpture. And time. Time is our final element where the artwork's telling a story or involving movement. We have an installation here where